In 1953, the average American family spent just 22% of their income on food. But for millions of working-class families across the South, the Midwest, and the rural hollows of Appalachia, even that number was a luxury they could not reach. They ate differently. They cooked differently. They stretched $1 into a week's worth of meals using techniques and ingredients that have all but vanished from the American table. Number 7 on this list was once the most common weeknight dinner in the country. Number 3 was served in school cafeterias, church basement, and every farmhouse from Georgia to Iowa. And number 1, the meal that kept more American families fed during the lean post-war years than any government program ever did, has been almost completely forgotten. These 25 dinners fed a nation. Then we threw them away the moment we could afford to. Before we start, hit subscribe. What you are about to see might just make you pick up a phone and call your grandmother. Let's count down. Before there was cereal, before there were granola bars, before anything came in a box, there was bread and milk. A bowl, a few slices of day-old white bread torn into pieces, warm milk poured over the top, sometimes a pinch of sugar. That was supper. In rural homes across Tennessee, Kentucky, and West Virginia, this was the meal that appeared when the money ran out and the week was not over yet. Mothers called it a poor supper. Children did not know the difference. The bread swelled soft in the warm milk, turning the whole bowl into something almost like porridge. A loaf of bread cost about 16 cents in 1952. A quart of milk was 21. For a family of 6, this was dinner for under 50. No one talks about it now, but in 1,000 old farmhouses, this was the taste of getting through. Long before brunch became a lifestyle, working families across the Midwest turned canned creamed corn into a hot, filling meal by ladling it over toasted white bread. A can of green giant creamed corn cost about $9. Bread was already on the counter. The whole thing came together in 5 minutes on a gas burner. Mothers would heat the corn in a saucepan, season it with salt and a scrape of butter, if there was any, and pour it thick and steaming over 2 slices of toast. Complaint: it was sweet, warm, and filling enough to get through a cold winter evening. The toast soaked up the creamy corn liquid and turned almost custardy at the bottom. This was Tuesday night in the Midwest. Quick, cheap, and humble. Today, it does not even appear in vintage cookbooks. It was too humble to write down. Number 23. Fried bologna sandwiches. Every working-class kitchen in America had a roll of bologna in the refrigerator. It cost about 30 cents a pound in the mid-1950s and fed a family for days. But fried bologna was not a sandwich you threw together cold. Mothers cut thick slices, made 2 small notches in the edges so the meat would not curl, and laid them flat in a hot cast-iron skillet. The bologna would blister and brown at the edges, swelling in the center from the heat, filling the kitchen with the smell that brought children running from 3 rooms away. Served on white bread with yellow mustard and maybe a slice of government cheese. Fried bologna was a proper hot meal, not an afterthought, not a snack. Dinner. Men ate it after long shifts. Kids ate it before school. There was no shame in it because everyone was eating the same thing. Number 22. Crackers and milk. Some meals in post-war America existed purely to silence hunger before bed. Crackers and milk was one of them. Saltines broken into a glass of cold milk and eaten with a spoon were the unofficial supper of children across the rural South and Midwest on nights when there was nothing left to cook. It cost almost nothing. A box of saltines ran about a dime. The milk was already in the icebox. What made it a real thing, a ritual rather than a defeat, was the way mothers served it. The same way every time. The crackers went in first. The milk came after. You waited 30 seconds for the crackers to soften just enough to hold their shape. Then you ate fast before they turned to paste. Oral histories from the era speak of this with surprising warmth. It was the last thing before sleep. Simple, reliable. Theirs. Number 21st. Macaroni and tomatoes. This is not mac and cheese. This is not pasta with marinara sauce. This is something older and more honest than either of those things. Cooked elbow macaroni, drained, toss back into the pot with the can of whole peeled tomatoes, broken up by hand, salt, pepper, emper, and a knob of bacon grease. That was it. The tomatoes coated the macaroni in an acidic, savory sauce that was nothing like anything from a restaurant. It was brighter, plainer, more filling. A can of tomatoes cost about 12 cents in 1955. A box of macaroni was 9. This fed for people with enough left for lunch the next day. Every Southern grandmother made this. Church cookbooks from Georgia to Mississippi listed it without ingredients because everyone already knew. Today's home cooks have replaced it with jarred pasta sauce and never looked back. That's the loss nobody notices. On farms across the rural South and the Ozarks, potato soup was not a starter. It was the meal. Diced potatoes simmered in water with a chunk of salted fatback or salt pork until the potatoes were soft enough to break apart with a spoon, creating their own thick, starchy picture of broth. Onions went in early. Salt and pepper went in at the end. A splash of canned evaporated milk, if you had it, turned the broth creamy without any butter or cream. Fatback cost about 8 cents a pound. Potatoes came from the root cellar or the garden. This dinner cost almost nothing, and it filled every stomach at the table. The fat from the pork floated in small golden pools across the surface. Children dragged cornbread through the broth until the bowl was clean. Nothing was left. Nothing was ever left. Number 19. Wilted lettuce salad with hot bacon dressing. Here is where things get interesting. This dish, which sounds like something a fine dining chef invented, was actually the poor man's solution to limp garden lettuce and leftover bacon grease. Leaf lettuce, straight from the garden, was placed in a bowl. In the skillet, bacon grease was heated with the splash of apple cider vinegar and a pinch of sugar until it bubbled and spat. Then the hot mixture was poured directly over the raw lettuce. The heat wilted the leaves instantly. The vinegar brightened everything, and the fat created a glossy, rich coating that turned garden greens into something almost elegant. Served alongside cornbread or pinto beans, this was a full meal on a summer evening in Appalachia. The technique is barely mentioned today. It appeared in handwritten community cookbooks from Virginia to Arkansas, passed between neighbors who grew the same gardens and shared the same skillet. This was the dish that made 1 pound of ground beef. Feed a family of 6 without anyone feeling shortchanged. Hulled bell peppers scraped clean were filled with a mixture of brown ground beef, cooked rice, canned tomatoes, and onion. They were then baked in a dish with a little tomato juice in the bottom to steam them soft. The rice doubled the volume of the filling for almost nothing, and the pepper itself became the bowl, which meant less washing up. Every slice of meat was stretched by the rice and the vegetable. Every forkful had something different happening. Bell peppers cost about 5 cents each at a 1,950 roadside market. Ground beef ran about 4 cents a pound. These sat in the center of weeknight dinner tables across Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. They looked like effort. They felt like abundance. They were neither. Before tuna became the default pantry protein, canned salmon was the affordable fish that stretched across American working-class kitchens. A tall can of pink salmon cost about 25 cents in 1954. Mothers would drain it, remove the larger bones, mix it with cracker, crumbs, egg, onion, and a spoonful of mustard, shape it into patties, and fry them in a skillet until golden on both sides. The outside crisped into a thin, crackling shell. The inside stayed moist and pink and almost creamy. Served with creamed peas or stewed tomatoes and a wedge of cornbread, salmon patties were a Friday night supper that felt like something you would order at a diner. Children who refused to eat fish ate these without a second thought. The recipe lived in every women's club cookbook from 1940 to 1965, then disappeared almost entirely when canned tuna became cheaper and salmon became something you ordered at restaurants. Number 16. Hamburger gravy over mashed potatoes. Farmers called it poor man's steak. Mothers called it hamburger gravy. Children just called it supper. Ground beef browned in a cast iron skillet with diced onion. Then a spoonful of flour stirred in to coat the meat, and milk poured over slowly until the whole thing bubbled into a thick, savory white gravy with brown beef throughout. Poured over a mountain of mashed potatoes. That was it. Ground beef cost 43 cents a pound in 1956. A 5 lb bag of potatoes was 29. This fed 6 people for under $1. The gravy soaked into the potatoes so that every bite carried both. It was heavy, filling, and deeply satisfying in the way that only food made of starch and fat can be. This appeared on dinner tables from Montana ranch kitchens to Detroit tenement apartments. It has no elegant name. It needed none. Number 15. Salt pork and beans. First pattern break. Here is a meal that built the American working class and then got erased from it. Salt pork, a piece of heavily cured fatback about the size of a fist, went into a pot of dried navy beans soaked overnight. The pot then simmered for 3 to 4 hours until the beans turned soft and the broth became silky with rendered fat and pork flavor. A pound of dried navy beans cost about a dime. Salt pork was 12 cents a pound. This pot fed a family of 8 for 2 days. The beans absorbed the salt, the fat, and the deep cured pork flavor until they tasted like something far more expensive than what they were. Served with cornbread for sapping and sliced raw onion on the side. Every farm kitchen in the South and Midwest kept a crock of salt pork in the cellar. This was the meal that got people through hard winters, bad harvests, and weeks when the paycheck did not stretch. Today, it is gone from the American table almost entirely, replaced by canned beans and jarred sauces. Nobody talks about what we lost when we stopped making it. Number 14. Chicken and dumplings. In the Depression, a hen too old to lay was too valuable to waste. By the 1950s, stewing hens were still the cheapest chicken you could buy, about 15 cents a pound, compared to 35 cents for a fryer. Mothers simmered them for 2 hours until the meat fell from the bone and the broth turned golden and rich. Then the dumplings went in. Not the rolled, flat southern kind, the dropped kind. Spoonfuls of flour, baking powder, salt, and milk dropped directly into the boiling broth where they swelled into pale, tender clouds that absorbed the chicken flavor from the inside out. The whole pot thickened into something between a soup and a stew. It was the meal that appeared when someone was sick, when a neighbor had a death in the family, when the weather turned cold and nothing else would do. It was care-made edible. Across the mountain south, this was not a side dish. This was the meal. A pot of pinto beans started the night before, soaked, then simmered all day with a ham, hock, or a piece of salt pork, seasoned with nothing but salt, pepper, and thyme. By supper time, the beans had broken down at the edges, thickening the pot liquor into a rich, dark broth that tasted nothing like the canned beans sold in supermarkets today. Cast iron skillet cornbread baked while the beans simmered. You crumbled the cornbread directly into the beans. You ate from a single bowl. In parts of Kentucky and Tennessee, this dinner appeared 5 or 6 nights a week for families who could not afford anything else. The beans cost 8 cents a pound. The ham hock was a scrap the butcher practically gave away. This meal built generations of Americans who worked in coal mines and textile mills and never asked for anything fancy. They did not need fancy. They had this. Number 12. Navy bean soup with ham bone. If salt pork and beans was the everyday meal, navy bean soup with the leftover ham bone was the Sunday luxury. After Easter or Christmas, when the ham was picked clean, the bone went straight into a pot of soaked navy beans with diced onion, celery, maize, and a bay leaf. By afternoon, the kitchen smelled like something you would find at a roadside diner, warm, meaty, and deeply comforting. The broth turned the color of weak tea, cloudy with dissolved starch, and each bean swelled full and yielding around its soft center. The last scraps of meat that fell from the bone during cooking floated through the soup in tender shreds. Senate bean soup, essentially the same thing, has been served in the United States Senate dining room since the early 1900s. That tells you everything about how sustaining this soup actually was. Today, we buy boxed broth and skip the bone. The depth of flavor left with it. Number 11. Creamed chipped beef on toast. The military called it something unprintable. Civilians called it SOS, and ate it without complaint. Thin slices of dried, heavily salted beef, about 35 cents, were torn into strips and stirred into a thick white sauce made of butter, flour, yamar, and milk, then poured over white toast. The saltiness of the beef seasoned the sauce without any additional effort. The toast soaked up the cream gravy and turned soft beneath the weight of it. Every veteran who came home from Korea or World War II had eaten this for breakfast on a base somewhere. They brought the recipe home because it was fast and filling. Mothers who had fed families through rationing recognized it immediately. It appeared in American home kitchens throughout the 1950s as a weeknight supper, a quick lunch, a Sunday breakfast. Today, it appears nowhere except in discussions of military nostalgia. Second pattern break. Food companies don't want you to think about this one too hard. Beef liver was one of the most nutritious foods an American family could put on the table in the 1950s, packed with iron, vitamin B12, and protein. And it cost about 20 cents a pound. Butchers had more of it than they knew what to do with. Mothers sliced it thin, dredged it in flour, and laid it into a hot skillet, while sliced onions caramelized in a second pan. The liver cooked fast, 2 minutes aside. Any longer, and it turned tough and bitter, which is why a generation grew up hating it. Done right, it was mild and rich, the outside golden and slightly crisp, the inside still faintly pink. The onions went over the top in a pile, the whole thing set in pan drippings, served with mashed potatoes and green beans. This was a complete, nourishing 30-cent meal. We stopped cooking it because we could afford not to. The nutrition didn't go anywhere. The knowledge did. In the low country of South Carolina and Georgia, hop and John was not just food. It was tradition, it was superstition, and it was survival compressed into a single pot. Black-eyed peas cooked with a smoked ham hock, then were tossed with long-grain white rice and seasoned with salt and a pinch of red pepper. The rice absorbed the smoky, earthy broth from the peas, and the peas swelled until they split at their centers. The whole pot tasted of the South in a way that is almost impossible to describe to someone who did not grow up eating it. Eaten on New Year's Day, it brought good luck. Eaten on a Tuesday in February because there was nothing else, it brought dinner. Black-eyed peas cost 7 cents a pound in 1954. Rice was a pantry staple. This pot fed a large family for next to nothing and left them full. Today, hop and John appears on restaurant menus as a Southern specialty. In the 1950s, it was what poor families in the Carolinas ate to stay alive. Number 8. Scrapple. This is the one that makes people flinch. Scrapple is what Pennsylvania Dutch farmers made when they slaughtered a hog in November and could not afford to waste a single piece. Scraps of pork, the trimmings, the organ meat, the head meat, moat simmered in water until the meat fell apart, then mixed with cornmeal and buckwheat flour and seasoned with sage, thyme, and black pepper, poured into loaf pans and allowed to set firm overnight. The next morning, the loaf was sliced to 4 and thick and fried in a skillet until each side turned deep, mahogany, and crisp. It was served alongside fried eggs with the drizzle of maple syrup or a spoonful of apple butter. In Lancaster County and the Delaware Valley, this was the breakfast that launched working men into fields and factories. A loaf cost about 18 cents and lasted a week. Today, you can find scrapple at a handful of specialty butchers in Pennsylvania. Everywhere else, it has been forgotten entirely. Number 7. Split pea soup with ham. Third, pattern break. No other dish in the American poor man's kitchen stretched as far as a pot of split pea soup made with the ham bone and dried split peas. Dried green peas cost 9 cents a pound in the mid-1950s. The ham bone come from whatever was left of Sunday dinner. Everything else, water, onion, carrot, a sabet leaf, came from the root cellar or the garden. The peas dissolved as they cooked, thickening the soup without any flour or cream, turning the broth a pale, earthy green. The ham bone released collagen into the broth as it simmered, giving the soup a body that coated a spoon and warmed a person from the sternum outward. You could feel it working. Children who refused to eat vegetables ate 2 bowls of this. Mothers made it on Sunday afternoon and fed the family from it through Tuesday. The whole batch cost about 30. No meal on this list gave more for less. And yet it has nearly vanished from American home cooking, replaced by Campbell's soup that tastes of nothing in particular. Tomato gravy over biscuits was the weekday staple long before red-eye gravy and sausage gravy became the celebrated stars of Southern breakfast tables. Bacon grease in a cast-iron skillet. A spoonful of flour stirred in until it turned the color of a paper bag. Then a can of whole tomatoes crushed in by hand, and a splash of water to bring the whole thing to a simmer. Salt, black pepper, and a pinch of sugar if the tomatoes were too sharp. Poured thick over split homemade biscuits. This was breakfast. Sometimes it was also supper. The tomatoes gave the gravy an acid brightness that cut through the richness of the lard biscuits beneath. Canned tomatoes cost about 12 cents in 1955. Flour and lard came from the 50 lb bag stored in every southern pantry. This gravy appeared on tables in Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, and Tennessee on nearly every morning that was not Sunday. It has all but disappeared. The word succotash comes from Narragansett, meaning broken corn kernels, and the dish predates the United States by several centuries. Native Americans taught it to settlers, and settlers taught it to everyone who came after. By the 1950s, swatatac, cooked dried lima beans, and corn simmered together with a piece of salt pork had become the staple side that served as a main course in poor households. Lima beans ran about 10 cents a pound. Corn came from the garden or cost a nickel a can. The salt pork gave everything a fatty, smoky depth that made the simple combination of two vegetables taste like something far more substantial. In the South, a bowl of swatatac and a wedge of cornbread was a full meal. In New England, the same dish appeared with a different name and a slightly different bean. Every region had a version. Every version was cheap, nutritious, and filling. Today, it appears as a side at summer cookouts and nowhere else. This requires a specific clarification. The modern version of fried potatoes, the breakfast hash, the roasted potato wedge, the home fry, is a side dish. In the 1950s, for millions of families, a cast-iron skillet full of sliced raw potatoes, fried low and slow with the sliced onion and bacon grease until everything turned golden and the potatoes crisped at the edges, was supper. Nothing alongside it. Maybe bread. Potatoes cost about $3 for a 50 lb bag at a farm market. Bacon grease was saved in a can on the stove. The onion came from the garden. The whole meal cost pennies and fed everyone at the table. The potatoes took on the flavor of the fat as they cooked, becoming something entirely different from a boiled potato. The onions caramelized into sweet, soft ribbons woven through the crisp starch. Children ate seconds. Fathers asked about thirds. This was not a meal of defeat. For families who had it every Wednesday, it was one of the best things they ate all week. If you understand this dish, you understand how the American South ate for the better part of 2 centuries. A large bunch of collarded greens, or turnip greens or mustard greens, washed and torn from their stems, dropped into a pot with a piece of salt pork and just enough water to cover, then cooked low and slow for 1 to 2 hours until the greens wilted completely and the pot liquor, the dark, salty, mineral-rich liquid at the bottom, turned to the color of strong tea. The pot liquor was not a byproduct. It was the point. Cornbread was baked specifically to be crumbled into it, and 12 eaten with a spoon. The greens themselves were served alongside, dark and soft, and carrying the deep flavor of the cured pork. Salt pork cost about 12 cents a pound. A bunch of collards at a southern roadside stand was a dime. Nutritionists now know that collarded greens cooked this way retain remarkable amounts of calcium, iron, and folate. Poor southern families knew none of this. They knew it kept them strong. They were right. Every Friday in kitchens from Baltimore to Birmingham, a ham hock went into a pot of soaked black-eyed peas and simmered for the better part of the afternoon. The hock, the lower portion of the pig's leg, was almost entirely bone, skin, and cartilage. But what it released into the cooking water during those long hours was extraordinary. The broth turned rust-cold and deeply smoky, thick with gelatin from the skin and collagen from the joints. The peas drank it in. By the time supper was ready, the liquid was as satisfying as any stock you could make with 5 times the ingredients and twice the effort. The meat that fell from the hock, small, almost stringy pieces of heavily smoked pork, was divided among the plates. Ham hocks sold for about 15 cents each in the 1950s. 2 fed a family comfortably. Church cookbooks from the era list this as the first recipe, not because it was impressive, but because everyone needed to know how to make it. At the top of this list is something so plain, so unglamorous, so thoroughly stripped of everything modern food culture values, that naming it almost feels like a disappointment. Bean soup. Not a specific regional version, not a named variety with a memorable story attached. Just dried beans, whatever kind was in the pantry, simmered in water with an onion, bay leaf, and whatever scrap of cured pork was available. Cooked until the beans broke down and thickened the water into something that could sustain human life through a long winter on almost nothing. This is the meal that appears in every American oral history of poverty from the Great Depression through the post-war years. In Appalachian mining communities, in Dust Bowl farm towns, in urban tenements from Chicago to Cleveland, in the sharecropper shacks of the Mississippi Delta, bean soup was 30 to 20. What kept families alive when everything else ran out? A pound of dried beans cost 8 to 10 cents throughout the 1950s. It fed 6 people for 2 days. Nothing in the American kitchen has ever done more for less. And nothing has been more thoroughly erased by the convenience economy that replaced it. We traded this meal and everything it represented for canned soup, frozen dinners, and the comfortable amnesia of a full supermarket. The families who made it did not have that choice. They made it because they had to, and they made it well, and they fed their children. And those children grew up and forgot it existed. This is the meal we should remember most. Here's the challenge. Make one of these this week. The salmon patties, the hamburger gravy, the tomato gravy over biscuits. Make something your grandparents made without a second thought. Then come back and tell me if it was as bad as you thought it would be, because I made the pinto beans and cornbread, and I haven't bought canned soup since. These weren't consolation meals. They were the real thing. Drop the one you were going to try in the comments. I want to know if the fried potatoes get more love than the split pea soup, because these weren't just dinners. They were a way of life we were sold out of.